Look what's happening on the back pages this morning. We're going to get into some of these in a little bit more detail. Anon, draw your attention over here to Rice toiling over hardest decision. We've been calling out for Declan Rice to speak for some time, and he has at last spoken to the Times. So we're going to bring you the details of exactly what it is he's saying. Spoiler alert, it's not that fascinating. That's coming your way in just a few minutes' time. FA looks into abuse aimed at James McClean. This is news that the FA are going to revisit that case of, as James McClean calls it, sectarian abuse against the player. The Irish Times this morning is all about the rugby with a big weekend ahead. Ireland ready for Argentina onslaught, writes Jerry Thornley here, and Finlay Bealham, Noel Scannell and Dave Kilcoyne enjoying their work there. And McCaw says Schmidt would face stiff competition if he targets the New Zealand job. So, yeah, there's just a bunch of commentary from Richie McCaw, who's been doing some interview work over the last 24, 48 hours, and there's various takes on that. Exact story, Schmidt to New Zealand over the course of a lot of the newspapers. Solid foundations, writes the Examiner this morning. O'Brien returns as big guns roll out for Argentina. And we get a good shot of the Irish scrum squaring up there, training during the week. Ronan O'Gara's take inside as well. And finally from me for the minute, it is Joe Schmidt, the man of the moment here, suited and booted for the Puma test as he picks up a Distinguished Fellowship award at Griffith College, and he seems to be enjoying himself there as well. Everyone's hoping that Schmidt comes back home. Says McCaw here. A slightly different take from one of our earlier versions there, writes David Kelly in the Irish Independent. North Boss O'Neill sees the funny side of Jimmy Dunn's call-up, so we'll have more details on all of those upcoming. From one distinguished fellow to another, it's Eddie Jones on the back of the Irish Daily Mail. Jones's sly dig reads the headline. England boss reopens old Sexton wounds, says Rory Keane. So excuse me, Eddie Jones has been speaking about Owen Farrell's injury that he's been nursing this week after the Springboks game last week, and he says that if he was Johnny Sexton, then we'd be able to complain about him, but because he's Owen Farrell, he's allowed to be hit late. He gets up and he plays on. He'll be like that this week. So it's not the first time that Eddie Jones has had a small bit of a pop against Johnny Sexton. Also there on the back page of the Mail is McClean knows he was wrong, says Rowett. That's in relation to James McClean calling a section of their supporters cavemen, says Gary Rowett. Back page of the Herald is Celtic have high hoops. Euro dreams are still alive after thriller at Parkhead. You know, to some people that'll be very, very offensive to say that they have a high hoop, but Celtic certainly have them. They won last night. They beat RB Leipzig. Got a high hoop. I've heard of somebody that had that before. It was apparently you can take amphetamines for it. It's God. This is the only treatment for a high hoop. The hoop would only get higher with amphetamines is what I've heard. The back page of the Mirror is you've been warned. Schmidt tells his star names that they are no certain to be chosen to face All Blacks. Nobody is safe in that Ireland squad at the moment. And Pellegrini saying that Rice will get better. We'll return to the Declan Rice situation in just a moment. Back page of the Sun then, Callum on over. Wilson cherry-picked. So England new boy Callum Wilson is a £35 million target for Chelsea, which would be an interesting signing for them in January. He seems to be hitting his best form once again after that terrible injury not too long ago. And speaking of serious injuries, you can see Danny Welbeck there. Welbeck horror, injured seriously last night in that they'd all draw at Sporting Lisbon. We'll see the full extent of that, no doubt, in the next 24 hours or so. Back page of the Irish Daily Star this morning is Hypocrites. Lennon slams the double standards over Mourinho antics. So he's been speaking about Jose Mourinho after Gary Caldwell claimed that Lennon brings a lot of it on himself with relation to some of the controversy he's been involved with. And he says that we speak about Jose Mourinho in a very different way in terms of the way that he perhaps go to the crowd against Juventus at the weekend, or in midweek I should say. Back page of The Guardian is Jones puts faith in Farrell. Warrior fly half will face the All Blacks despite fitness fears. And Welbeck blow sours night for Arsenal. Striker suffers horror injury during Europa League match with Sporting, while Giroud's rare goal fires Chelsea into the last 32. And then finally, the Daily Telegraph sports section has gone with Ton-Up Jennings. Born-again batsman scores unbeaten. First Test century in 2 years to put England on top in Sri Lanka. All right, here's what we're going to bring you inside the back pages on. We're going to talk about that Declan Rice article, give you some more details on that. We have Eddie Jones' comments on Johnny Sexton. That's some interesting stuff from him. We've also got that Jose Pep sliding doors. Not Pepe, obviously. But I would read a Pepe sliding door story with Jose Mourinho. But interesting Xavi comments in there as well. The Premier League race at the bottom, there's a pretty tight squeeze at the bottom, so Stuart James writes about that in The Guardian this morning. And GA jobs and experience, it turns out that it is a country for all men after all, so that's a bit of a flavour of what's happening inside the back pages, and we're going to get you some detail on those. Now, Declan Rice, we've been sort of talking about this for the last while. It's a bit of a scoop from the Times, the London edition essentially, which appears in the Ireland edition obviously this morning as well. We've been saying for the last while that, you know, the one thing this story needs now is for Declan Rice to speak, because that's going to move the story on. It really hasn't, is kind of the short story. It's Declan Rice, not particularly interrogated. I don't know the context of the interview or exactly how it's come about, if it's a press conference or whatever.
It was for a charity initiative that Declan Rice is involved with people with disabilities in his local community.
Yeah, so it hasn't, you know, he hasn't been, I suppose, he's talking to Gary Jacob in this piece, and, you know, it's one of the hardest decisions I'll ever have to make is the headline out of it, so that will kind of give you a bit of an idea as to the salaciousness or otherwise of the article. There's very little in it really, other than to say that it's been a bit of a tug of war for him. He's met Martin O'Neill, and Martin O'Neill was very impressive, and he called over to his parents' house and he impressed him, and we'd spoken about this on the show only a few weeks back, that I certainly would have made the point that I'd like to have Martin O'Neill in my corner in that regard, that I think actually he can be, when he wants to be, an impressive communicator, and I can easily see how he might be able to sort of win somebody over in that way. And he speaks about Gareth Southgate being equally impressive. He speaks about the influence that John Terry has had in his career. I'd actually sort of built up in my mind, at least anyway, some sort of an impression that himself and John Terry were kind of best buddies, but it isn't really that at all. It's like, we text each other once every 6 months or whatever. He came through the Chelsea Academy, and Terry was obviously the club captain at the time, would have taken an interest in him given his position. And even when he got let off, Terry comes over to the house and sort of says, listen, you know, gives him a 45-minute pep talk about keep your eye on the prize, this isn't done for you, you'll have a long career if you keep at it. So that sort of positive influence. But just in terms of the Ireland thing, really, it doesn't move the story forward at all, I would suggest.
No, not at all. It just kind of illuminates a little bit more how important it is to the Rice family, how important it is to his father, his association with Ireland. He says that he's got all his caps framed in the house. He says that family back home and stuff are eager and are very proud of him wearing the green jersey. But obviously he says that it's a big decision for him to make. As you say, the John Terry stuff is the most interesting thing in the piece. Like, did you really think John Terry was somebody who cared too deeply about some kid who got let go from the academy?
I've absolutely... that was not a surprise to me.
Right, okay.
Like, I know there's a perception obviously out there about John Terry, and to be fair to him, he does a lot to support that perception at times. But there are people, if you listen to them, Pat Nevin particularly is one of them, who will tell you that as a human being, he has things to recommend him. And clearly that aspect of it is one as well. And, like, you know...
It harbours well for John Terry as a potential manager, hearing stuff like that, hearing the idea that he cares clearly about a would-be teammate on a human level. That, you know, Declan Rice growing up, I guess he probably had an appreciation that this kid Declan Rice viewed him as one of his idols as a young footballer. You know, he talks about Sergio Ramos being one of his idols as well. Now, I'm not so sure if Sergio Ramos would pick up the phone or even call over to the house, say if things were different and he was in the Madrid Academy, to actually go and say, listen man, you are going to be fine, you just need to keep up the confidence. But John Terry, it seems, is the type of person who would do that. So fair play to him is all I can say about that. But as you say, when it comes to Ireland, still very much in the dark. But then again, the dark is a better place to be than this universe where Declan Rice is an England player. It gives us this little bit of hope.
It does. It definitely does. I just think that the longer it goes on, obviously he's got a window through which he's got to remain out of the international scene if he is going to declare for England. And this is his inaction is ultimately filling that gap one way or the other. So for me, the longer it goes on, it seems as if a few weeks ago there'd been some sort of an exclusive, one of the newspapers that said he is actually going to declare for England now. I mean, if you want to be uber optimistic, you can read that article today and sort of leave it with a sense of, well, you know, maybe this guy's still on the fence. I'm really not convinced.
The thing about it, though, is that, and it's only a small thing, what we've heard from Declan Rice speaking in the past has always been via Irish journalists. When he said, I'm very proud to represent Ireland, you know, a few months ago. Maybe he was saying that because he heard Irish accents everywhere in the mix zone, and he was kind of beefing it up a small bit. But really, in this situation, I'd imagine at that event yesterday, it's all English journalists. He wouldn't be as guarded as he usually was, so I don't think he's trying to give us some sort of cloud of optimism and trying to be a little bit more coy than he really is. I take this at face value that there really is still a decision to be made.
The one quote that stood out for me here in terms of that specific aspect of it, so we talked about both, without a doubt, not an easy decision. One of the hardest decisions will have to make in my career. Let's face it, it's the hardest decision he's going to have to make in his career, whatever he does at club level. But even whatever he does at club level, they're just decisions that players will have to make all the time in terms of, I stay at this club, I go, I want an increase, I get whatever it is. Like, this is going to be the biggest decision that he's going to make. Martin was excellent when he came to my house, and Gareth was excellent with me, and they both understand the position I'm in. I said I just need some time, as if I'm going to be playing for the rest of my career. I need to make the right decision. What's best for me and my family? They were both great, to be fair. I told both managers that I'm just focusing on playing for West Ham at the moment, as that was on the back of a good last season. He says, being 19 and playing as many games as I have, I never thought I would be in a position to make such a hard decision. Now, you could really read into that, obviously, in a way that says, I never thought that I would be on England's radar to have to make this decision.
Yeah, I'd say it's probably true, isn't it? He probably did hope one day, like when John Terry's calling around to your house and saying you're going to be okay, like, surely you're thinking to yourself, well, I can still make it to a pretty high level.
I think if you've let go by you're let go by the Chelsea Academy, any international.
I'm sure Terry was saying to him that the Academy is not the be-all and end-all of everybody's career. In fact, who knows where Declan Rice might have been if the Chelsea Academy had kept him. Chances are, at this juncture in his career, at 19 years old, he would not be in as good a position as he is now. Leaving that Chelsea Academy and getting an opportunity elsewhere was probably the best thing that ever happened to Declan Rice in the short term. Maybe in the long term he would have broken through into the first team, but that certainly wouldn't have happened until he was 22.
Yeah, he does talk about the sort of, which is an interesting theme that's taken up by Robbie Henshaw in the papers today, about that sort of positional thing as well, about where he's best suited to, whether it's at centre back or whether it's that holding midfield position. So I suppose we'll see over the next while, but there's nothing no great revelations in that piece this morning. It's not really advancing the story in any fantastic way. He's still on the fence. Short story.
Yeah. Eddie Jones as well is in the
Speaking of people on the fence.
Speaking of people on the fence, Jones a sly dig, as we said a moment ago, about Johnny Sexton. So he's kind of reopened the old Sexton wounds. Just to repeat what was said, he's been speaking about Owen Farrell and his recovery from a hip injury, about whether or not he'll be fit and whether or not how his fitness is progressing. And basically he says that if he was Johnny Sexton, then we'd be able to complain about him in terms of his treatment against the Springboks last week. But because he's Owen Farrell, he's allowed to be hit late. He gets up and he plays on. He'll be like that this week. So it's not even, I was going to say it's a veiled dig. It's not a veiled dig at all. It's a clear dig at Johnny Sexton. To be fair, if you're an England rugby supporter and you're reading that this morning, you're like, good on you, Eddie Jones. Good on you in creating some sort of siege mentality in terms of making the headlines talk about injustice from a referee standpoint against England, because when it comes to the best team in the world, what do they have going for them? They've got referees who, when it comes to the on-the-fence decisions, they're often coming down on the All Black side on these on-defence decisions. So getting the officials on your side and particularly pushing them away from, say, Irish favouritism, if that's what he thinks, that's surely a positive thing from England rugby's point of view. If
I'm an England rugby supporter this morning, I'm like, Eddie Jones, shut your trap, get out and win some games and then get back. Those sort of comments are absolutely fine when England are winning, and when they're losing, he looks just... I struggle to find the positive in Eddie Jones, I have to say, on a very consistent basis.
And I think that's why you're saying what you just said about Eddie Jones. Take away the idea that he's Eddie Jones and say it's just say it was Joe Schmidt in a position where Ireland are in a pretty bad run of form and they've had a bad calendar year, and Johnny Sexton has got hit late, he's carrying a bit of a knock, hasn't really been anything done, and across the water you've got Owen Farrell, who's getting away with things, in your view, who's getting away with things a lot more than your out half is. What are you going to say? Of course you're going to stick up for your out half. Of course you're going to say that the whole world is against us, because when it comes to these sort of things, the idea of a siege mentality works.
Yeah. Of all the players to be saying that the whole world is against us at the minute, Owen Farrell definitely has had not much of a case, given what he's been over the last couple of weeks.
Not a case at all, I would say.
That's some context to it, but ultimately I think you're right. There's definitely a bit of the Jose Mourinho's about it. Is this constant whinging and moaning from a guy that at times shows just a lack of class, to use that word that's been sort of bandied about in the week about Mourinho as well, that why pull Sexton into it? There's nothing to do with it. Like, it's not, No Ireland, England on the radar anytime soon, Eddie. Put that in your back pocket and save it for another time. It's the constant, it's the regularity of the whinginess.
Well, maybe when you say put it in your back pocket and save it for another time, maybe we'll be talking about these quotes before the next England game. Maybe he'll be very thankful for the idea that he had this in his back pocket for another time.
Eddie Jones is going to limp his way onto the World Cup is what's going to happen. And if results recently are anything to go by, they're going to have an absolute nightmare, and he's going to go on his merry way afterwards and sort of take up a club role somewhere that people don't have to listen to him.
And it sounds like he'll be pretty happy about that. I kind of like having Eddie Jones up here in the Northern Hemisphere. I like him being in the same news cycle that Ireland are in quite often, particularly around the Six Nations.
I enjoyed that for about 2 weeks, and then I was just a pain in the arse.
Yeah, pain in the arse is sometimes an entertaining thing if it's not in your own country.
I've had too many pains in the arse that have been entertaining.
Well, like in terms of it not being your own pain in the arse, it's affecting England, not us. Like he is single-handedly causing headlines like this. We are talking about an England head coach as having a lack of class. Like I don't know. I think that it's all well and good. It's all pretty fun at the moment. If we were losing to England now and we were ranked lower than them and we didn't feel supremely confident to beat them in any game, any day of the week, then I think we might view them in a very different way. But there's a bit of a joke shop going on in the RFU and with Eddie Jones at the moment. And I think we need to enjoy this joke shop while the doors are open and all guests are accepted.
Right. What else have you got for us?
We've got Jose and Pep Guardiola, of course, going head-to-head this weekend in the Premier League. It is the Manchester derby. Interesting piece done in the Mirror this morning, but it really kind of comes from the new Barcelona documentary, which Graham Hunter, of course, is involved in. And Xavi has been speaking about Jose Mourinho because, of course, Xavi would have worked with Jose for a brief period when Jose was in with Bobby Robson at Barcelona and Xavi was in the academy. They talk about the sliding doors moment, which came after Frank Rijkaard left Barcelona and the Barcelona hierarchy had to choose, and they were either going to go for Pep Guardiola or they were going to go for Jose Mourinho. And it felt that Jose Mourinho would have been the choice were it not for the way his style changed at Chelsea, which is kind of an important thing to say. So Xavi says Mourinho helped us a lot when we were young players. Possession, holding onto the ball, positional play, we worked on all of that with Mourinho. But when he went to Chelsea, his philosophy of the game changed. He then talks about several directors remaining intent on appointing Mourinho after Rijkaard and says it was a long process because there were board members who wanted Jose. They argued that we needed to appoint a manager who would get results quickly. Unfortunately, however, it was the opinion of club legend Johan Cruyff which swung the decision in Guardiola's favour. He wanted to stay faithful to Cruyff's philosophy. I asked if Pep was ready, and Johan, who saw him regularly, said he was, said one of the Barcelona chiefs. So imagine how different the world of football would be if Jose Mourinho had actually picked up that Barcelona job. Where would Pep Guardiola have gone? Probably he would have gone to become a very successful manager, might have gone to Italy, might have gone to a different club in Spain first and built his way up. But certainly from a Jose Mourinho standpoint and from a Barcelona standpoint, the world would be a vastly different place. And really, what would have changed it? It would have been the perception of Jose Mourinho which would have changed this. They were just concerned about him going to a far more rigid style of play after Porto when he went in with Chelsea, and that's essentially what affected his chances of getting the Barcelona job. Would he have taken the Barcelona job, though, at a time when things were going okay from a Chelsea is an entirely different thing.
Another question. It's always felt like having missed out that job was a bit of a chip on the shoulder for Mourinho. Like he is that sort of guy who needs a bit of a reason to get up in the morning and sort of prove somebody wrong, I suppose. It has sort of felt, I would think, that it was a bit of a driving factor for him. Interesting to hear Xavi say that he was very good with the young players. Like it's something that he maybe needs to work on a little bit at the minute. That there's such an amount of conversation in the off season about whether Martial and Rashford would even be at the club this season. And like United has always been that club that has sort of brought young players through and has built a lot of their success around that, while spending obviously the best part of £1 billion on accumulating a squad elsewhere as well. But maybe that's an area that he's been a bit deficient on over the last little while, actually.
Well, that's the thing. I think you take the then Jose Mourinho in Chelsea, and he has regressed stylistically, not hugely. Results-wise, obviously, he's regressed a tiny bit, but that's only been a very recent thing. But certainly when it comes to young players, he's abandoned that theory. And maybe it was he became indoctrinated in the ways of Roman Abramovich, that he thought to himself, well, this whole idea of having an opportunity in 21st century football to develop a young squad and to develop stars for the future is just not an option. This is not the way football is played anymore. We need results, and we need them now. And I often think it's very interesting when you look at the context of Jose Mourinho's career in the context of Pep Guardiola's career, and you look at the moment when, the last time before now, when they were both managing in the same league, which was, of course, in La Liga. I really think that Jose Mourinho, as Real Madrid manager at that time, saw himself as the antithesis of Pep Guardiola, or began to see himself as the antithesis of Pep Guardiola, and his belief that football should be played in a rigid way where results always come first was actually hardened during his time. It
wasn't because it was
Spain.
His philosophy, it was because he needed to be anti-Pep.
Exactly, that's what I think. And I think that just adds an intrigue to this rivalry. And it is a rivalry, obviously, we're going to see this weekend. And I think it is the first time that we can really be intrigued by a Manchester United-Manchester City game during the Jose Pep era. And that's said with the gift of hindsight, because in previous years it's been like, well, this is going to be amazing, and it's always underwhelmed. But I think half of that is because of a perfect dovetail of form, where Manchester City have always been on the rise and Manchester United have always had their struggles. We'll only know really after Sunday how real the renaissance is in Manchester United. I do suspect that it's a false dawn. But there is the fact of the matter is that they've just beaten Juventus. They've just come through a tough battle at the Vitality Stadium where they won in the last minute of the game. And you can't overestimate how much that does for a dressing room. So I'm hopeful that we're finally going to get a good Jose Pep ding-dong battle in the Premier League.
That's why you're whelmed, essentially.
Yeah, I wouldn't say I'm overwhelmed.
You're not underwhelmed or overwhelmed, you're just whelmed.
Yeah, okay, let's go with that. I'm whelmed.
I'm not sure, though. I have to say,
I'm trying to pick this up.
There to be optimistic, and do tune in for commentary of the game right here on Off the Ball on Sunday. But having said all of that, like, you'd be surprised if City don't win it. Yeah,
you would be surprised if City don't win it. Like it's because they are possibly the best team we've ever seen in the Premier League, rather than Manchester United being in a run of form that's only shown recent signs of light, that you can't say it is excellent form right now. Also, Manchester City are at home. A home win, any game that Manchester City don't win at home is 2 points or 3 points dropped, I would say.
You've going to take us to The Guardian next. I think Stuart James writing about the very opposite end of the table and how, I mean, I don't know what the essence of this piece is. Is it that it's very exciting that there's a lot of shit teams at the bottom, or there's a lot of shit teams at the bottom and that's shit?
It's both things are true.
Okay.
So in the bigger picture, the fact that there's a lot of bad teams in the bottom of the table, that is not good for the Premier League, naturally, because the Premier League brands itself as the most competitive league in the world. The bottom 5 would suggest that it's certainly not the best league in the world. After 11 matches, do you want to guess how many points, if you go with the current run of form, how many points you would need to survive?
I'm going to take a pot of this and say 22 points.
Wow, what a guess. What a guess from Adrian Barry this morning. That is
straight off the top of my head stuff.
That is a combination of football nous and mathematical nous.
I'm a football man, Owen, as you know.
You really are, and a mathematical one. So 22 points is all you'll need to survive if things keep going the way they're going. Because after 11 matches, it is the single worst start by the bottom 5 teams in Premier League history. They've first time ever that they've got 7 or fewer points from their opening 11 matches. So the bottom 5 have played the top 5 19 times this season. How many points have they taken from those 19 games? Do you want to have another pot?
Oh, give me the start of that again. The bottom 5 played the top 5 19 times this season.
19 occasions when they played.
Well, on the basis that 22 points is going to make them survive, I'd say 2 points.
0 points. Not a single point has been picked up against the top 5 by any of the bottom 5 this season, which kind of supports this theory that we've been speaking about recently, that the top 6 against the rest is just a chasm at this point, and it's going to keep on growing that way. But as you say, as I said as well, it's a positive and a negative. The positive is come the end of the season, we could have an absolute cracker of a bottom 5 race. We could have a cracker of a relegation battle. Let's just hope that everyone stays as crap as one another, and they don't. That no team kind of. Let's hope that Newcastle's win last week basically is a false dawn, and the win for Huddersfield on Monday was a false dawn. Let's not hope that. Let's hope that it doesn't transpire into any sort of good form, and that 3 end up getting relegated. Because if you're going to be bad, at least give us some crap excitement.
And also the other thing is, you won't survive on 22 points.
No, it would be bizarre if the awful start of the season would actually transpire into
the entire premise of the article is, I think, just ultimately going to be proved false.
Well, the 22 points thing will probably be proved false, but that wasn't the premise of the article. The premise of the article is that the bottom 5 were very, very bad this season, and it might become a trend, and that is worrying for the Premier League.
Yeah, okay. I mean, as in, like, normally you get 2 teams that are clearly beneath the rest of the quality.
Quite often it's 1.
Okay.
And in many seasons, well, not many seasons, in about 2 or 3 seasons over the last 10 years, you've had no real weak link in the league. Like last year in particular was a great example of no team that tanked completely, but this year things have changed. I think we're going to move on to our last talking point of the breakfast menu this morning.
I'll just make one, just before we do that, there was one thing that I wanted to mention about the James McCain article in the Times Ireland edition this morning, that FA looking into abuse aimed at McCain. There was just one line that stood out to me that I feel I was surprised by it, and I actually, in hindsight, I don't know quite why. Last year, Kick It Out received 400, so Kick It Out is the obviously group who are an
group,
oversight for abuse in the game, essentially. Received 469 reports of abusive behaviour, but none related to anti-Irish abuse.
Not a single complaint. No. So this is the first complaint they've ever had about anti-Irish abuse.
Is this a complaint? I don't know that this. I actually just I don't know the answer to that. I don't know at what point it becomes a complaint. I don't know that James McCain has to, like, of the 469 complaints, I'm assuming that they're all put through official channels as paperwork done, and there's committees meeting about it and that sort of stuff. So I don't know, but
does that surprise you? That's that.
Yeah, I was surprised by it. Like, it was, your initial sort of, but I mean, thinking about it, there, you would have expected there to have been some complaints.
Obviously this is all we don't know who any of these complaints were made about, and clearly there was only one anti-Irish complaint made, if it was a complaint, and it was against James McCain. Where else is the anti-Irish sentiment going to come from?
It's just in the context of the way everything is going at the minute.
Yes.
Right? Like we're becoming a less sort of tolerant society, that, we frequently are very sort of wound up with all the things that separate us, and disregarding the fact that 99.9999% of us, regardless of your name, your age, your skin colour, where you come, who your parents are, we're pretty much the exact same, barring 0.0001%.
Yeah, I would have a suspicion that there isn't actually that much of an anti-Irish sentiment in the stands in English football grounds. The anti-Irish sentiment is brought up by the idea of James McCain. They resent what he represents as a non-poppy wearer, and they then target the thing that they can target him with, which is being Irish. I don't necessarily think that if James McCain was wandering around the pitch and he wasn't James McCain, they'd be necessarily targeting him for being Irish. It's obviously the way they feel he's behaved in an unacceptable manner.
100%.
It isn't really an unacceptable manner.
Fair enough. And I know that football has changed as well. It's become a much more sanitised thing and all. I just mean in the context of 500 complaints. That's all I'm saying. Volume.
I agree. I'm not saying that football stands are a good place to be. I would imagine that you would hear racism 50% of the time if you go to a ground in England. If you stand in one of the more militant ends, let's just put it that way, of a football ground, you will hear racist abuse quite an amount of time. I would just be surprised if you heard much anti-Irish abuse. It might come from a very simple thing that there aren't actually that many Irish players left in the Premier League to target, but it also comes from the idea that really in 2018, do football fans really care about Irish people the way they used to really care about them?
No, they've moved on to abuse other people, essentially.
Exactly. I'm not defending football fans here, but I think that's a huge part of it.
The final story that we were going to touch on here, there's a couple of them linked. Paul Keane writing in the Times Ireland edition that experienced managers are in demand is the story here. Statistics showing that counties select candidates who've served their time at the top level of GAA. Writes Paul Keane here that essentially it is a country for old men, and if you have experience of the game, that's to recommend you. It's hooked around the idea that John Mahon at the age of 56 is back in the game, and that this is not an outlier, that in fact this is the way the county boards are going. Yeah,
no managers under the age of 40, it seems, left in the inter-county game, as far as I remember. Certainly
a lot in their 40s, just the vast majority in their 40s, just none below that.
Yeah, and it is, the great irony in this is that 3 different All-Ireland winning managers this decade, in fact, every manager that's not Jim Gavin, that's won in All-Ireland this decade, has been in their 30s.
Right.
So Pat Gilroy was in his 30s. This is according to the article. I actually didn't know that.
I
thought he was older. Jim McGuinness and Eamon Fitzmaurice were all in their 30s as well. That all surprises me. I thought they were all in their 40s, but according to the article, not the case. So that is the great irony in all of this. But it just goes to show that the time for risk in the GAA is certainly not now. It might come from increased expenditure from county board level. They can't afford to take a chance on any guy taking charge of their inter-county team right now. They need somebody who's going to make use of their resources and execute it well. Now the thing is, there is no guarantee that experience from the 90s or from the last decade is going to help today. Like John Mahon talking in the newspaper today, literally says that there's no connection between an increased backroom team and results. Something that I would dispute quite a bit. I think the reason why backroom teams have become so inflated is because strength and conditioning and statistical analysis has actually improved how teams are performing. It is performance enhancement and legal performance enhancement of that, I should stress. But John Maher, because whenever you use the term performance enhancement,
does it on. We've been there already today.
You always think of something else. But I would say that there is still an old school view of thought, and I'm not talking about John Maughan here, I'm saying in general. I think there is an old school of thought that is still rewarded by county boards. That there's something about the county board culture that they look at someone and they're like, that guy's old school, I can relate with that guy. You know, screw the backroom team, he's a genuine GA man.
I would think that actually it's, Jesus, I'd love to be involved in a county board with one of the perceived weaker teams where you like go and take an effing risk. What the hell have you got to lose? Like, bring somebody in who you can sit down, who can, like, not a chancer, right? Somebody who you can sit down who's got some sort of demonstrable evidence of having taken a team at some level and achieved success beyond what was expected, right? And look at the methods that was done by and have all of those conversations. I'm not saying take a stupid punt on somebody, but what I am saying is, like, take an educated punt on some young person coming up through the game who might go on to be the Jim Gavin or the Pep Guardiola of GA. Like, it's Jesus, why not? Because like, look, the alternative, to finish the point, the alternative is that you're a county, and I'll use my own example, like Westmeath, that you're just plodding along anyway. It's not making any difference bringing in, and to be fair to Westmeath, they do have a younger manager in place now, but the other stuff is just not working out. So, like, your basic expectation from a season is next to nil anyway. So what the hell have you got to lose?
I would say part of it, definitely not all of it, because it's definitely a cultural thing, but part of it also comes down to the way your season lines out. If you've got a championship structure that guarantees you a dozen games of meaningful quality in a season, then a county board is more likely to take a risk. They're likely to say, well, you know, you've got a dozen games this year to really ingrain a culture of perhaps success, get new players a run, try out new methods that we haven't previously tried, and then next year we'll actually put the pressure on you for results. Whereas the way it is now is if you've got 2 games this year and 2 games next year, perhaps, of meaningful quality for a good 10, 12 teams in the entire football championship. So why are you going to take a risk? There's nothing to play with in terms of a risk. When it comes to a risk in the Premier League, you give them 10 games. You see how it goes. You give them a bit of time to build it up. But the way things are in the GEA, like, you don't show up in your one meaningful championship game and it's curtains. You could be the best up-and-coming manager ever, but then suddenly your reputation is in tatters. So I think that's part of it as well. But definitely, I think the cultural thing kind of comes first.
It's tied into, there's a story, I think it might be in the Examiner this morning, about Jason Ryan getting involved with the Cork footballers. He's gone in as a consultant. He's not going in any sort of full-time front-line role, but he is going in as a consultant, and it just seems like such a smart move that you'd have somebody who's been involved in the game at that level, still a very young coach, who at one point was being touted as, we just mentioned, the sort of future Jim Gavins or Pep Guardiolas of Gaelic football, and was certainly being touted in that direction, and, you know, at still a very young age, has a whole bunch of experience and definitely has something to offer in that regard. So it seems like a smart move by Cork. Like, you've Stephen Rochford obviously getting involved in Donegal, you've James Horan going back in Mayo, and, like, I would always maintain that brain drain from Gaelic games, be it hurling or football, is never really a smart thing. Like, you know, you use the NFL, the American football example of coaches who tend to get top jobs. They don't generally get spat out. They go back into, like, top college roles, or they can be career coaches.
Yeah, I guess that helps as well, though, but the fact that there is an actual structure there that is vastly different to our own, that there's so many college jobs out there, and
they're getting paid, and it's the full-time gig, and there is that difference, sure.
Yeah, like, first of all, just pick you up on something there. You were giving out to me about using the word bespoke at the top of the show. You just used the word brain drain. So hashtag brain drain. You know, I'm just saying it's good. It's very business speak, but it's good.
Oh, is it business speak?
I would say so. I've never really heard the term before. It's true though. Like, there is a fine line to be struck here between getting a guy in, and he's experienced, but getting him in for the sake of that experience,
sure,
rather than actually kind of taking a detailed look at that experience. What has he learned from the process? And I think, do county boards ask themselves the question more deeper? Do they ask themselves this: what have they achieved during that experience, or what have they learned during that experience?
Apart from the experience itself.
Apart from the experience itself. Like, you would like to think that every intercounty manager who's been involved this century has learned something from it, but there are different levels of learning. I would definitely say when it comes to the James Horn example, he learned quite a bit from his first time in charge of Mayo. I think they're fairly safe with that example, but there's a couple of other examples which are a tad more risky, I think, when it comes to the perceived good experiences that a manager might have got.
There was one comment that jumped out at me from the piece just exactly on that topic that you're talking about. It says, a quote here, "Players like to work with experienced guys, particularly when they're at a development stage in their careers." Writes John Evans, the Wicklow football manager, who's seen a team or two. As he says himself, Tipperary, Meath, Roscommon, etc., etc. So.